No one believed it. How could they? Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traore was working in a gold mine wearing traditional clothes alongside ordinary miners. The footage captured by French cameras went viral worldwide. Propaganda, critics said. But 3 days later, when Traore risked his own life to save two miners during an underground explosion, all doubts vanished. Speaking from his hospital room in a live broadcast, Traore revealed a shocking truth that stunned the world. Our mines produce wealth, but our people are dying. Here is the law I'm changing. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty landscape of eastern Burkina Faso. The Bukoma gold mine, one of the country's largest, was already bustling with activity. Trucks moved steadily in and out of the complex, carrying either equipment in or precious ore out. Foreign supervisors in clean helmets and pressed uniforms directed operations from air-conditioned offices overlooking the pit. Below ground, hundreds of miners worked in narrow tunnels, their bodies covered in sweat and dust, their lungs filled with particles that would slowly kill them over the years. Among them was a new worker who had started just 2 days earlier. He wore the same worn boots, the same dirt-stained clothes, and carried the same basic tools as everyone else. But there was something different about him, a quiet intensity, an observant gaze that missed nothing. None of the miners recognized Ibrahim Traore, the 35-year-old president of Burkina Faso, as he worked alongside them, experiencing firsthand the conditions his citizens endured daily. "Pass the pickaxe," Traore said to Ousmane, a veteran miner who had been assigned to train the new recruit. Ousmane handed over the tool without looking up. "Remember, keep your back straight when you swing, or you'll be crippled by 40 like the rest of us." Traore nodded, carefully mimicking the older man's technique. For 2 days, he had maintained his cover successfully. He had eaten the same meager meals, slept in the same cramped dormitories, and endured the same back-breaking labor as every other miner. This unorthodox mission had begun a week earlier in the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. Traore had been reviewing the latest mining export statistics when something caught his attention. "These numbers don't make sense," he said to his economic advisor, Aminata Diallo. "Burkina Faso exported 70 tons of gold last year, worth nearly $4 billion. Yet our government received only $300 million in royalties and taxes, and wages for miners remained below $5 per day." Aminata nodded grimly. The contracts signed by previous administrations are extremely favorable to foreign companies. Global Gold, the French conglomerate, takes 93% of the profits from Bukoma. "And what about safety conditions, health protections?" Traore pressed. "On paper, they meet international standards," Aminata replied carefully. "But we've received numerous reports suggesting the reality is very different." Traore fell silent, his military training evident in his disciplined demeanor. Since taking power, he had prioritized reclaiming Burkina Faso's resources from foreign control. But to truly understand the situation, he needed to see it with his own eyes. "I need to visit these mines," he said finally. "Of course, sir. I'll arrange an official tour." "No," Traore interrupted. "Not as president. They'll show me what they want me to see. Clean dormitories, safety equipment, smiling workers. I need to see the truth." His security chief, Colonel Ouedraogo, immediately objected. "Mr. President, what you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. If something happened to you, something is already happening to thousands of my citizens every day." Traore countered, "How can I change their reality if I don't understand it?" And so, with minimal preparation and against the desperate advice of his security team, President Ibrahim Traore had arranged to be secretly inserted into the Bukoma mine as a new worker. Only 3 people knew his true identity: his chief of security, his personal physician, who provided him with a medical kit disguised as personal items, and one trusted member of his military detail who was also undercover as a miner in a different section of the complex. Now, on his third day underground, Traore was beginning to understand the full extent of the miners' plight. The air was thick with dust that clung to the lungs. Support beams that should have been replaced showed dangerous signs of strain. And the miners themselves spoke of persistent coughs, unexplained fevers, and colleagues who simply disappeared when they became too sick to work. "How long have you been mining?" Traore asked Ousmane during a brief water break. 23 years, the older man replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Started when the French company first came. They promised us good wages, healthcare, education for our children." He laughed bitterly. "Now my lungs are full of dust, my back is broken, and my son works right beside me because we still can't afford school." Traore was about to respond when a shout echoed down the tunnel. "Inspection! Management coming through!" The miners quickly straightened up, reaching for safety equipment that normally remained unused due to discomfort and the pressure to meet quotas. Traore pulled his headlamp lower over his face and focused on his work. A group of executives in clean coveralls and shiny helmets made their way through the tunnel, guided by the mine supervisor. Among them was a face Traore recognized immediately. Philippe Laverne, CEO of Global Gold, who had met with him at the presidential palace just months earlier, promising world-class standards at all their African operations. As the inspection party passed, Traore overheard Laverne speaking to his colleagues. "The new president's nationalization threats are just political theater," he said confidently. "They always talk tough at first, but reality sets in when they realize they can't operate these mines without us. A few extra dollars in community projects should calm things down." The executives laughed, their voices echoing down the tunnel as they moved on to the next section. Traore gripped his pickaxe tighter, his resolve strengthening. That evening, in the crowded dormitory where 50 miners shared a space designed for 20, Traore listened as the men discussed their frustrations. Most had never seen a government inspector. Many suffered from health issues but couldn't afford to miss work. All felt forgotten by the country they were helping to enrich. "My cousin in the processing plant says the real gold numbers are double what they report to the government," one young miner whispered. "They have 2 sets of books." Another nodded. "And the safety equipment? It exists only when visitors come. The rest of the time, it's locked away because it slows production." Traore absorbed everything, saying little. He had seen enough to confirm his suspicions, but he wanted to gather as much evidence as possible before revealing himself and taking action. The next morning started like any other. Traore descended into the mine with his team, pushing deeper into the earth. They were working in a new section, one that the more experienced miners viewed with suspicion. "These supports aren't right," Ousmane muttered, tapping a wooden beam that showed signs of stress. "I told the supervisor last week, but he said quotas come first." Traore examined the beam. His military training had included basic engineering, and what he saw concerned him. "We should report this again," he suggested. Ousmane laughed without humor. "And be marked as troublemakers. That's how you lose your job, my friend." They continued working, but Traore kept a watchful eye on the supports. An hour later, his vigilance proved warranted when a distant rumble preceded a shower of dirt from the ceiling. "Everyone out!" he shouted, his presidential authority momentarily breaking through his disguise. "The supports are failing!" The miners reacted immediately, rushing toward the tunnel entrance. Traore helped an elderly worker who had stumbled, guiding him toward safety. They had nearly reached the main passage when a thunderous crack announced the complete failure of the support structure. As dust and debris filled the air, Traore looked back to see 2 young miners trapped on the wrong side of a partial collapse. Without hesitation, he turned and rushed back toward the danger. "What are you doing?" Usman shouted after him. "The whole section could come down." But Traore was already pushing through the falling debris, reaching the trapped miners. "This way," he directed, finding a narrow path that remained partially clear. "Stay low and move quickly." As they navigated through the collapsing tunnel, a secondary cave-in sent a support beam crashing down. Traore pushed both miners forward to safety, but couldn't completely clear the danger himself. The beam struck him across the back and shoulder, pinning him momentarily as more debris rained down. Through sheer determination and adrenaline, he managed to free himself and stumbled the remaining distance to safety, emerging into the main tunnel where emergency responders were just arriving. The realization of who had just saved the two miners spread quickly. A supervisor, rushing to manage the crisis, stopped short when he recognized the dust-covered face of Burkina Faso's president. "Mr. President?" he stammered in disbelief. How are you?" But Traore was focused on the injured miners, directing the medical team to attend to others first despite his own injuries. As word spread through the mine, miners gathered around, equally shocked and moved by the presence of their president among them. Within hours, the story had leaked to the press. A French news crew that happened to be in the country, filming a documentary on West African development, captured footage of Traore emerging from the mine, his arm being tended to by medics, still wearing the simple clothes of a miner. "Propaganda stunt gone wrong," declared international news outlets initially. "Political theater," echoed Global Gold's hastily released statement, suggesting the president's presence had been a brief photo opportunity that coincided with an unfortunate accident. But as miners came forward to confirm that Traore had worked alongside them for 3 full days, experiencing every hardship they endured, the narrative began to shift. When it became clear that he had risked his life to save 2 young workers, even skeptical foreign media had to acknowledge the extraordinary nature of his actions. From his hospital bed, where doctors insisted he remain for observation despite his protests, Ibrahim Traore addressed the nation and the world. His face was still marked with dust from the mine, his shoulder bandaged where the beam had struck him, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Today, I speak to you not as someone who has read reports about mining conditions, but as someone who has lived them," he began. "For 3 days, I worked alongside the citizens who extract the wealth from our soil. I breathed the same contaminated air. I worked with the same inadequate safety measures. I listened as they spoke of illnesses never treated, of wages that keep them in poverty, despite their labor creating billions in wealth." He paused, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position. "What I discovered goes beyond poor conditions. I found systematic deception. The gold being extracted from our land is significantly underreported. Safety regulations exist only on paper. Profits flow out of Burkina Faso, while our people who produce this wealth can't afford medicine or education." The camera zoomed in as Traore reached for a document beside his bed. "Therefore, as of this moment, I am invoking emergency powers to implement the Gold Sovereignty Act, which I have just signed. This legislation makes 3 immediate changes." He held up one finger. First, all mining operations in Burkina Faso will undergo immediate independent safety inspections. Any mine not meeting standards will be closed until compliance is achieved. A second finger joined the first. Second, a new transparency regime will be implemented. Production volumes will be monitored by a joint committee, including government officials, company representatives, and elected worker delegates. Export quantities and values will be publicly reported. He raised a third finger. Finally, and most importantly, the profit-sharing structure of all mining contracts is hereby renegotiated. No longer will foreign companies take 93% of the wealth from our soil. The new standard will be a minimum of 50% of net profits remaining in Burkina Faso, with 15% directly allocated to worker wages and safety improvements. 15% to local community development, and 20% to national infrastructure and services. The implications were seismic. Analysts would later call it the most significant resource nationalization in African history since Libya's oil reforms in the 1970s. Global markets reacted immediately, with mining stocks plummeting and emergency board meetings called at every major company operating in West Africa. This is not about politics or ideology, Traore continued. This is about a basic truth I witnessed with my own eyes. The wealth beneath our soil must benefit the people who live on it. No nation can truly be free when its resources enrich others while its citizens suffer. As he concluded his address, Traore spoke directly to the miners he had worked alongside. To my brothers at Burkina Mine, thank you for accepting me as one of you, for teaching me, for showing me the reality that reports and statistics could never convey. Your dignity in the face of exploitation has inspired a new chapter for our nation. The international response was predictably hostile. The French government immediately expressed grave concerns about contract stability and foreign investment protection. Global Gold announced it was reviewing its legal options while simultaneously launching a public relations campaign highlighting its community contributions. What they hadn't anticipated was the evidence Traore had gathered during his undercover mission. In the days following his hospital address, his government released damning documentation. Secret production records showing systematic underreporting of gold extraction, internal emails discussing ways to circumvent safety regulations, and medical data revealing rates of lung disease among miners that were concealed from official reports. Most devastatingly, Traore released the recording he had secretly made of Global Gold's CEO, Philippe Laverne, dismissing nationalization concerns and suggesting token community projects would suffice to calm things down. The contrast between those callous words and the images of Traore risking his life to save miners created a narrative the companies couldn't counter. African public opinion rallied strongly behind Burkina Faso. Neighboring countries began examining their own mining contracts. Workers across the continent pointed to Traore's actions as evidence that their leaders could choose a different path in relations with foreign corporations. 3 weeks after the mine incident, when Global Gold and other mining companies finally returned to the negotiation table, they found themselves in an unprecedented position. Rather than facing government bureaucrats across the table, they were seated across from a coalition that included Burkina Faso's Minister of Mines, independent economists, and, most disconcertingly for the executives, a delegation of miners including Ousmane, who now wore a clean suit, but whose steady gaze carried the weight of decades underground. We are not opposed to partnership, the Minister of Mines opened, but true partnership cannot exist where one side takes nearly everything while the other remains in poverty. The negotiations were tense and extended, but the companies ultimately found themselves without leverage. The evidence of their past practices was too damning, the public sentiment too strongly behind Traore's reforms, and perhaps most significantly, other African nations were watching closely, considering similar measures. In the end, a historic new framework emerged. Mining companies retained operational control but agreed to the new profit-sharing model, transparent reporting requirements, and stringent safety standards with independent verification. What economic analysts had predicted would drive foreign investment away, instead, created a new model that companies grudgingly acknowledged could be sustainable. 6 months after his underground mission, Ibrahim Traore stood at the entrance of the Burkina mine to inaugurate its reopening under the new framework. Beside him stood Ousmane, now serving as the head of the newly formed Miners' Safety Council. The mine had been transformed. Modern ventilation systems removed harmful dust. Support structures exceeded international standards. A medical clinic operated on site, with advanced screening for early detection of lung disease. Most significantly, the miners now earned wages that allowed them to send their children to school instead of down into the tunnels. "What you did changed everything," Usman told Traore privately before the ceremony. "Not just the law, but coming down here yourself, living our lives, even for a few days." Traore nodded thoughtfully. Leaders make decisions based on what they know. Too often, we know only numbers on paper, not the human reality behind them. As he addressed the gathered miners and their families, Traore spoke about sovereignty in terms that resonated beyond economics. "True independence isn't declared in documents or celebrated on holidays," he said. "It exists when the resources of a nation benefit its people, when the gold from our soil builds our schools and hospitals rather than foreign bank accounts, when those who labor are treated with dignity and share in the wealth they create." The international media, which had initially dismissed Traore's mining adventure as a publicity stunt, now analyzed the Traore Doctrine as a potential turning point in resource politics. Academic papers would later identify his approach as a middle path between two extremes. Neither the complete nationalization that had sometimes led to operational failures in other countries, nor the exploitative arrangements that had defined the post-colonial era. For the miners of Burkina Faso, however, the philosophy mattered less than the tangible changes in their daily lives. Children who would have followed their fathers underground were instead attending newly built schools. Families once trapped in generational poverty began building modest but dignified homes. Community health centers treated conditions that had previously been death sentences. Global Gold and other mining companies, after their initial resistance, discovered an unexpected outcome. With healthier, better paid workers and improved community relations, productivity actually increased. Lower turnover, fewer accidents, and reduced conflict created operational efficiencies that partially offset the reduced profit margins. A year after the Bukoma incident, at a regional economic forum in Dakar, a journalist asked Traore if he would recommend his undercover approach to other African leaders. "Every president must find their own path," he answered carefully. "But I would say this: you cannot truly understand the lives of your citizens from inside a palace or from reports written by others. Sometimes, the most valuable intelligence comes not from advisors, but from experiencing the reality yourself." The pickaxe Traore had used during his days as a miner was mounted in a simple display in the National Museum in Ouagadougou. Beside it, a plaque bore words that would inspire a generation across Africa and beyond. "The wealth beneath our soil belongs to the people who live upon it. Leadership is not about privilege, but about service, sometimes underground, always with courage." What do you think of this story? Should other world leaders follow Ibrahim Traore's example and experience the hardships their citizens face firsthand? Would this kind of direct experience lead to better policies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to see more inspiring stories about African leadership. Let us know in the comments what other aspects of Ibrahim Traore's leadership you'd like to learn about.